This episode of the podcast is brought to you by HRH Combat Arms. They can turn your vision into reality. They specialize in gunsmithing and Cerakoting. Your Cerakote specialist is Air Force veteran and retired police sergeant Paul Ware, a.k.a. the Sarge. He can Cerakote your firearms, auto parts, tools, even your sports equipment. And then your master gunsmith is Marine veteran Steve Miller. This veteran-owned business is located at 5025 Saunders Suite, 103, Fort Worth, Texas, 76119. You can call them at 682-304-0363, and you can find them online at www.hrhcombatarms.com. That's www.hrhcombatarms.com. Silky, sweet, smooth guitar. Welcome back. I'm your host, Eric Levine. Two cops, one donut. If you don't know, now you know. I got a special guest with me today, retired Fort Worth officer, Lieutenant Winky Hicks. And he's coming on. He had a message he'd reached out with me for and wanted to come talk about it. And we're going to talk about his career and things like that. How you doing, Winky?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Dude, you have one of the best names I've ever heard in my life.
Well, it's 57 years old now, and I got stuck with it before I was ever born.
I love it.
It remained. It was a comic strip character in the Star Telegram, and I got it as a baby. So
really?
Yep, here I am.
Dude, between you, dang it, Cowboy, which that's a nickname, so it's not the same, but there's these certain people that I know we just like these Southern awesome names. There's one more I'm forgetting that I can't. I'm like, that's their real name? And they're like, yeah.
Well, and that's the funny part is nobody really knew my name is William. And one of my sister-in-laws got stopped one time by Dan Canfield. He was a traffic officer for years.
Okay.
And Dan stopped her. She started chatting one day, and she said, well, my brother-in-law is a police officer. His name's William Hicks. She said, Dan looked down and went, yeah, I don't know him, and started writing the ticket, and then looked back up and went, do you mean Winky? And she goes, well, yeah, I didn't know y'all called him that. And he goes, I didn't know his name was William. I've been working with him for 15 years.
Really?
Yeah, and about 5 minutes later, I get a phone call from Dan. He goes, is your name William? So
He's
he really didn't know because, our worksheets were just your first initial. So everybody just saw the W and went, yeah, that's just his name.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay. Well, I don't do a format. I told you. I just have conversations. Right. But you did 30 years of law enforcement, or close to.
I got my 30 in.
So you did the whole 30. Yeah. So you went through and you did the drop. Now, was there any law enforcement prior to the other thing that I do on the shows? I don't really mention where I work. So
right.
Did you? I mean, you're retired, so you can talk about where you work all you want. So. Did you always work for Fort Worth?
Yeah, that was the only agency I ever applied for. Right.
Okay. Preparing for that, part of this show is educating people like the steps that we all take, because we all took different steps to get in law enforcement.
Sure.
Did you do military? Did you education? Did you do anything, or did you jump straight from high school? And
well, when the department was hiring back in 1988, 89, you were required to have 30 hours of college credits at that point. And so my route was, I wasn't really prepared to do anything after I left high school. And, went around, did some sales jobs for a while, and then realized I met Ralph Mendoza when he was a sergeant in the police department, some other officers that were working for Dillard's Security. And they knew I kind of had some ambitions to be a police officer, so they really started pushing me to get my credits and get in school.
Yeah.
And so I went. I knew what I needed to do at that point, so I just went and got my 30 hours in.
Nice.
And that way I could apply for the job. And it was interesting in 88, 89, the process was absolutely different. And, I was the lieutenant over the background recruiting section for a little bit, so I was in charge of the testing for the department. And so it was so interesting to tell people stories about what I did. And I literally got called one day and they said, you need to come take the test. I was like, okay. And the next day I walked into a completely empty room, looked around, one guy sitting in there, and I said, hey, I'm here to take the test for police. And he goes, yeah, come on in. And I walked in. I was the only person there. Sat down and I took a test, and it was more of a almost like a general equivalency test. And it literally, you opened it up and it had pictures of boxes, closed, built, broken down. You had to decide which one was the right box compared to the one that was built. Had pictures of drills, of hammers, of all kinds of stuff. I mean, you had to circle the right one, English proficiency, reading, and that kind of stuff. And it was a test that covered all employees for the city of Fort Worth at that time.
Okay.
And I took it, and it even had some dexterity tests where you had the little washers and nails on a board where you had to flip the washers as fast as you can onto the board. And so it just tested everyone for everything. There was no civil service test in the door like there is now.
Oh.
It was really bizarre. And from the time I took that test to the time I got officially hired for the police department was 6 weeks. I was a hometown.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was a hometown kid. I was born and raised in Fort Worth. And so my background wasn't that difficult to do. And it was 6 weeks, but then it was another 3 months past that before our academy actually started.
No shit.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I wish it was still that way. I mean, there's a reason it's changed. We're trying to get, obviously we need higher quality recruits instead of guys like you.
Sure.
So
yeah. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. God rarely gives with both hands. I did the best I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because mine was like a year.
Right.
And then my background guy was retiring. So like he literally retired in the middle of my background check.
Yeah.
So I got neglected. And the only reason I had any sort of clue is because I had family on the department. So that helped me.
Sure.
Because it kept people like going like, hey, check in on my.
Well, the process of hiring a police officer is imperfect. And, the testing that they do identifies people that you believe are going to be capable of moving into the department and learning appropriately while in training. The background process should identify for you issues that a person may or may not have and help carry them through the process if they've got the character and the quality that you want as a police officer. The board process kind of follows that up. And then the academy, also, it's all a weed out process during that period. And I called the academy the weed in process, where you wanted to, you don't want people failing out. You want people, the work you've done in the past, to put people in there that are going to be successful.
Yeah.
And that can make it through the whole thing, because it's a big investment for a department. And so, it was, I think, not a great process when I got in. Our academy was much shorter. It was, I guess, about 4.5 months, 5 months, something like that. And now it's gotten almost a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So I figured out where this show is going to go. Okay, so gotcha. That helped out. So I was thinking the whole time, I was like, well, he's got a 30-year career. Yeah. We could guide this towards anything that he specialized in. So there's a lot of options with that. But I've talked about on the show previously of some of the issues I've seen as an academy instructor, hiring issues. So maybe we can discuss, as far as a background check goes, we can go into what a background check is, what it's designed to do, and then the aspect that I think it's failing at, and I'll just put it out here up front, is social skills. How do we get better at background checks for social skills when that's not a requirement?
Wow, that's an interesting question, and I don't know that you can test for social skills. Even the psychologicals that you have done are gonna occasionally they're gonna identify people that have social behaviors or tendencies that you don't want.
Yeah,
but they're never going to identify what you do want.
Yes,
very rarely, because the problem is, and I'll say this: my wife is a psychologist and works in a school district, and as the years have gone by, and she's watched kids' education, and this is kind of gets to where you're talking about, is that, kids were educated when she first started in the business 30 years ago by engaged conversation and what she calls face-to-face, and now she calls it shoulder-to-shoulder education, where kids are set down, they're told not to look up, and they're just looking down at, the iPads and the electronics.
Yeah.
And so you miss face-to-face education and socialization with kids, and that just carries on, throughout their lives. And so the the social skills that were developed maybe differently, for my generation, they don't always fit that well in today's policing, but the kids that are coming through today may also not have the skills to also work in today's police department.
Yes.
And, that's tricky.
Yeah.
Because a quiet kid may be a really, really good police officer in general, or they may have a lot of skills that are really good, but they're not necessarily going to be the ones you want out there engaged in the public. The problem is that's your job.
Yeah.
And so 99% of what you do is face to face, not shoulder to shoulder. Mm-hmm. And you've got to really work on that. I think that you could probably, you could probably take out a class or two that you teach at the academy and replace it with literally teaching social skills,
But I'll make the argument that you're not going to pick up social skills in that short time frame. You're not going to pick up social skills in a year.
No, you're definitely not. And I would say that's where officers like you that are in the department, because how long have you been there now?
8 years,
okay.
Going on 9. Yeah.
Going on that.
I've been in law enforcement for 17.
Right. But you're hitting that window where, you start realizing that you're a little bit more of a leader in the department. You're a little bit more of a mentor in the department.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it just takes people like you, that are willing to do a podcast or willing to get out there and has a little bit more social skills that can probably teach a kid a right way and a wrong way. Just pull them aside. Now, they may not want to listen to you, but at one point they might look back and go, you know what, I was able to get through this because Eric pulled me aside last year and told me, hey kid, you got to do something a little bit different. This isn't working. Mm-hmm. And I think the mentoring and just, people showing through what they're doing every day might be a better lesson than anything you're going to teach in an academy. Like you said, you can teach some of it, but you're not going to teach what it takes out there every day to get the job done. And, and the problem is you live in a world with the expectations in law enforcement where the citizens are expecting you to be, officer friendly and to be engaged. And it's just not always that easy. And it may just be personality, you know, and it's not that they're not a bad cop. It's just kind of who they are. And it doesn't make them, bad at their job, or that they're not doing their job, or that they're intentionally trying to do something, towards a certain person. It's just who they are. And you got to help them, kind of guide them through that.
Yep. I've noticed that the officers because that 0 to 5 year mark is the biggest window for your errors, your serious injuries, anything like that. And not just to the officer, but to the suspects or victims and stuff like that, of saying the wrong stuff, of doing the wrong things, of using force when your words could have been enough had you had the social skills and stuff to that nature. So I say anybody that comes in that's lacking the social skills, they're going to have a much harder first 5 years, and they're at a higher risk for either getting fired, becoming the next viral video, any of that. So I think it's an important aspect that we need to figure out. And if mentoring is part of that, I agree with you, but as well as I do, mentoring starts when they're in the street. Because in the academy, I can't do anything about your social skills, and they're kind of disingenuous because it's controlled. Everything's controlled. So the way you interact may be a cue, like, okay, there's something not right with the way he's talking, the way he's doing things, but it's not going to be the same when he's out in the field for real. It's just different, because it's real world.
Sure. And part of you were talking about, I guess, my skill set in the police department. And, prior to being a lieutenant and being in the background section, I was in internal affairs for a little bit. I helped start the SIU unit, and I was in major case. So, so I had a pretty broad look at.
What's that too? That's like a bunch of major departments.
Yeah, it was. And, it was a good education for me. But, that 0 to 5 year window is where you, like you said, you get a lot of complaints on officers. And it's not necessarily, it's not these complaints where this officer was corrupt or intentional or did anything that, rose to the level of, kind of an oh shit moment.
Yeah.
It was just they're making mistakes.
They're figuring it out.
Yeah, and they're trying to figure it out. And, the complaints that come in are usually about that in that group of officers.
Yeah. I've noticed that officers that I've heard had bad social skills when they first started. They had a rough first 5 years, but they made it. They pushed through it. And a lot of those guys tend to be really good officers later on, like better than most down the line, because they have learned every hard lesson, and they've learned the hard way, like what not to say, what not to do to get themselves into fights where at the beginning of their career, it was left and right. Everything they said was causing stuff to flare up or getting them into situations that you or I, who can talk to people, we squashed it at the lowest level quick and moved on to the next call.
Sure. So. And I've had friends, and I can think of a couple of them in the department. Of course, I won't say who they were.
Yeah.
But, and one of them was really good at knowing when he was getting ready to say something wrong. And he would actually kind of back up and go, can you please go talk? Can you do this? Because this is going to go south if I keep going.
Yeah.
And he really knew, hey,
he saw where he was tilting.
Yeah. And he'd say, I need to hand this off. And he teased me later on in life or in the career. And he said, he goes, you're always good at that touchy feely stuff. We're in a meeting one time, and he goes, this is coming back out in me again. He goes, can you go talk to these people?
What do you mean, these people, officer?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Exactly.
Start roasting them.
Well, it was actually management, but yes.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. It's a craft. I'll just say it's benefited me. It's been my best tool, is my verbal skills with people, and no major uses of force on my side of the table where I work now, just because I got so good at talking to people. Everybody knows their own skill sets, and I think it's good to have guys like you and me to help point out other people's what they're really good at. I just had my old man on the podcast yesterday or the day before. We did an impromptu one, and we got on the subject of as a supervisor taking your, I don't want to say bad troops, but problem people, and rather than hammering down on them for all the stuff they keep screwing up, figure out what they're good at and support that. Figure out what they're good at, support that, and then watch them shine. And I think that's a good tool to look at.
It is, and it's the hardest thing to do as a supervisor, because, and especially for the generation that your dad and I were from, because hammering people was pretty much all supervisors did.
Yeah.
It was, you saw your sergeants, and that was it. If you ever had an interaction with a lieutenant, it was because
your ass was in trouble.
Yeah, you were a problem. Mm-hmm. Anything above that, and you might be getting fired.
Yeah.
It was really different. And, to be able to find that in somebody and say, I'm going to move you here, I'll move you here because I think you'll be more successful, is not necessarily easy. And even in patrol where maybe you can't move somebody, you've got them, but, they're not really great at blank. You know what? Pull them aside and say, you know what? I want you to go run a traffic detail for me for a few days. I want to see you write tickets.
Yep.
And I want to see you do this enforcement. See if they're good at that. And it may give them an opportunity to go, you know what? I am pretty good at this. Maybe I should apply for traffic instead of staying here, because it gives me better chances to use my skill set. But it is really difficult, and you have to be really good. Your dad was a good leader for me, because he promoted ahead of me every time, and, he was a good person to learn lessons from, all the way even from when we were cops, on the street, when we were young officers. He was always a good leader. And, I always appreciated somebody like him being able to pull you aside and say, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah.
And I had a few of those.
Yeah. It's nice. 'Cause I can still bounce things off of him. He still knows the job really well.
Sure.
And, he's a private investigator for a law firm, and so his skill set's staying sharp. He's still doing interviews and talking to witnesses and stuff like that.
Right.
So when I have issues or trouble, in whatever it is, like, I'll give him a call and say, hey, what, I'll ask people I work with first. He's the last resort,
right?
Which would probably save me a lot more time if I just went to him first sometimes, but.
Yeah, but I understand also, because okay, Dad, you know.
Yeah.
But it's understandable. It's funny because I'm doing a little bit of PI work also.
Are you?
Yeah, I am.
Nice.
And, you know, it was an invitation from a friend's company. And
same for him.
I just thought, okay, yeah, I'll do this. And I asked him, he said, I just want you to work part-time. And I said, well, tell me your definition of part-time and I'll tell you if it meets my definition of part-time. Yeah. So we agreed, and I was on the road all last week, primarily doing some event planning for him.
Okay.
And, you know, it makes you feel like you got something left in the tank.
Yeah.
And it's nice to go out and do this every once in a while and like I said, stay sharp. And, you know, that'll go back. I don't know if you were around when Mitch Felder was the department chaplain.
Don't recognize the name.
He retired probably 10, maybe a little bit longer than that years ago. But I ran into Mitch after he retired and at Home Depot, you know, kind of bumped into each other, and he asked, you know, how things are going in the department and everything. And I wasn't close to retirement at that point, but we were just chatting about stuff. And he said, you know what? He goes, you can only go play golf and go fishing so often. He said, find something, you know, maybe at that first few years that you want to do that will help you fill that time until you get to the golfing and fishing part of it. He goes, do a little bit of everything. And he said, because there's just, you know, you still want to get out there and feel like you really got something.
Yeah.
And it was good advice. I never forgot it. And like I said, it's just a Home Depot visit.
Yeah.
At least 10 years ago.
One of the reasons I came up with this podcast was one of the first original ideas was getting retired guys on here.
Right.
Because one, wealth of knowledge, which is fun. Two, wealth of stories from a time that no longer exists of police work. So, sure. And then two or three, you've been around several retired guys when they get together, and the stories and the funny banter that goes back and forth. Like, I think people would love to hear that. It's another unique perspective, so the community could see, like, this is a fruitful career. This is what it leads to. This is the type of brotherhood these people have. And they may not even be in touch with each other since they've worked together. But here's an example of what that camaraderie is like. That's what people mean by thin blue line. And I try to explain, like, thin blue line is this stigma of being us versus them, when what I really think it is just peer support. It's us being there for each other.
Yeah, and it is interesting. And I had to explain this a couple of times to friends that were, you know, not in the police business about, you know, I started in 1989. I think your dad was around 87, somewhere in that range. We were real close to it, 88. Yeah. So now go backwards from that.
Yeah.
Okay, I had a 30-year career. Your dad had a 30-year career. And if you go backwards from that, I was working with and being trained by people who worked
during the civil rights.
1959. There was probably 2 or 3 officers that worked in that department when I got there, and they've been there since 1959. That was the end of their 30-year career. So they were trained during the civil rights era.
Wow.
They were trained in the early 70s. And, you know, so you think about what they saw and what they did and their experiences and how that shaped them as officers. Well, that's still coming over to us in 1989.
Yeah.
You know, because Rodney King, you know, and that was one of the biggest transformations or transitions.
That was 91.
It was 91. Yeah. And that was one of the biggest transitions in policing.
The video camera.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and for me, that's forever ago, you know, and it's amazing, you know, the leaps that have been made since then in 30 years from that.
Yeah.
And so that gives you an idea. But like I said, put into perspective and you go, oh, wow, I worked with guys that were police officers in 1959.
That's okay. So part of this is educating citizens.
Yeah.
And giving perspective and stuff like that. So the cultural differences in the world of policing. You said you were taught by officers that worked during the civil rights movement.
Sure.
So they're training you. These are the guys that are training you. So for people out there that are like, you know, there's racism in police work and all that stuff, I believe this is part of their argument, because you've got one generation between us and civil rights.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. It's not far back.
It's not far back at all. Mm-mm. And, you know, in my opinion, with social media and stuff, we're still in our infancy. We're still learning. We don't even know how to talk to each other on social media.
Right.
And that was, again, that's part of this whole experiment is I realized, like, us as police, we don't use social media worth of shit. We do not use it right, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, when I was in major case, social media could destroy you. When we had some issues or we had a shooting that was perceived as a bad shooting, it wasn't necessarily that way, but it made it through the wildfire before we could address it.
Right.
And we weren't using our social media at the time to do that.
Control your narrative.
Yeah. And we were actually not even very good at going on TV and controlling that narrative, or at least putting out information that would correct it.
Yeah.
And, and by and large, people on the opposite side of policing think that controlling a narrative or, putting information out for us is spin or covering up. That's where they would lean on it. For us, we can put information out about this and it's not going to hurt us. It's not going to hinder an investigation. And I had some good training that helped me understand that. And at least when I was in major case, the PIO's office, they were really good and they worked with us a lot to help get out information that was beneficial to the department and really to the city, because, things would get on edge and I would press, put this out there, get this out there. It will actually help. Well, what about the investigation?
How is it going to hurt?
Well, and that was especially with officer-involved shootings. It was never a whodunit with ours. We knew who did it. We were rebuilding what occurred. It was like an accident reconstruction. We were going to collect the information and the evidence and interviews and just put it back in pieces and say, this is what occurred. This is what we know factually happened. How is us talking about it going to hurt that?
Yeah. And I try to put that into younger officers when they get out to the field and they're working a crime scene and they're stuck on the perimeter and they've got the neighborhood coming up asking, like, what happened? We have a cultural stigma as officers of everything's secret squirrel.
Yeah.
I can't, not only can I not say, anything, I can't give you, I have to refer you to PIO and give you zero information.
Right.
And I think anybody that lives in that neighborhood, the crime affects them. They have a right to know. So I would rather train officers on the little things that we can give out while we're on scene that can help quell the crowd, because for them, it's the unknown that's causing the high tension.
Sure.
And you're actually making it safer by giving them a little bit. Now, obviously, don't go giving information that's going to hinder an investigation. That's where the training needs to start. These are the type of things that would hinder an investigation.
Right.
But other than that, general information, we had a shooting up here.
Yeah.
It involved a young kid. We're working that. Just bear with us. Okay. That's all I need to know. Thank you.
Yeah. And we, even to the point that we were bad at dealing with the media also. And it was, not only did we want to keep them at arm's length, we wanted to keep them a mile away. And one of the shootings that our team investigated, it was an unfortunate one, the way it occurred, but there was a former city council person that decided to become the town crier and was going around the neighborhood telling everyone what she thought happened. It was exactly opposite of what actually occurred, but it really caused problems for us. And, why the media was told, we need you to be about 1.5 miles away. That's where their command post was. And that's where we put the media, or where the media was put. Our team didn't do that. So the next one that we did, I had the media basically right up the crime scene line. One of the officers working with us, just about lost her mind. She's like, what are they doing near us? And I said, they're not walking through the neighborhood looking for stories. And I said, they're also not leaving that spot because they want a picture. And if we tell them in 10 minutes, we're going to come back and fill you in on something, they're not leaving.
Yeah.
Because they want to get the scoop on somebody. And so we kept, during my tenure, and I don't know how it operates now, but we kept the media closer to us because it allowed us to control that narrative.
Yeah.
And we weren't doing anything dishonest. It was just having them there with us, get a few pictures. It's not going to cause us problems. And we would tell them about every 10 minutes, we're going to update you as soon as we can. We're going to have a little briefing at blank time. They would stay there.
Yeah.
And it worked really well.
Yep. And I want to clarify when we're talking about controlling a narrative.
Right.
social media is the only tool that police have that is completely theirs to use as far as a communication tool.
Right.
So with the news, we all know if it bleeds, it leads. So if we give the media our story and they pick and choose out of that story what they want to show, we've lost control. That's what I mean by control of the narrative. But if we put out all the facts as we know it on social media, there's no one to filter through any of the story that we're giving and take it away from that. So when we jump on social media and we give a press conference, sure, all the media is around and they're listening, but at least we know if you go to our social media page and all the outlets, their Instagram, their Facebook, their YouTube, whatever it is they're using, you're going to get a complete and unfiltered statement from us. And I think for controlling the narrative, that is the best way to do it. So you can at least always fall back. And if some media outlet decides to play a twist on it, you can be like, nope, here's our link. This is what we said. It's been out there since the time they took this story.
Sure. And the hard part for, humans in general, but also for policing has always been to go back and say, you know what, we made a mistake.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with saying we made a mistake on this, and you don't have to say, well, we're not going to, it's, and occasionally you may not be able to discuss it for particular reasons, but there's nothing wrong with coming back and saying, you know what, there was an error in the statement that we made and we want to clarify that now. And it can be done, and it can be done honestly, where people go, oh, okay, they admitted that they made a mistake. It's not that big of a deal, and they'll move on. And especially in a world where 5 minutes, about 2 minutes is as long as you have somebody's attention span nowadays. Yeah. So, the move on process is pretty quick in the world that we're currently in, because they're on to the next thing on their, whatever, app they're on, they're going to go to it.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of people get on me because of how long my podcast goes. Like, dude, it's too long. Do like 20 minutes to a half hour. I'm like, I can't. For the vision that I have, it's just not possible. Yeah. I can't have a genuine conversation. I can't have people figure out where your personality's at in 20 minutes. You could be a fake person for 20 minutes. I could do it. Yeah. I could sit down here and act like somebody I'm really not for 20 minutes. But you get going an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours.
Right.
Your real personality is out there.
Yeah.
Most of the time we do it over some whiskey. However, it's 12 in the afternoon right now. I'm not really ready.
Yeah.
I'm still drinking coffee. So, and by the way, there's a little cooler next to you.
Okay.
It's got it's got a Coke, a Sprite, and a water. Gotcha. So that runs out on you.
I got you. I'm good. I appreciate that.
Normally I usually do this a little later in the day, but I told you we had something happen at work. So now I got to go in at 6 tonight. So.
Sure. Well, my other side of this is I'm also representing Tunnel to Towers, and I know we'll get to that.
Yeah, we will.
So Tunnel to Towers, they're an alcohol-free during,
okay.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'll stay away from that right now.
Okay, so we actually timed it very well then.
Very good.
So, all right. Well, so I want to jump back to backgrounds real quick because it's going to be very rare that I'm going to get somebody that's done major case, internal affairs, and background.
Right.
So on background, what do you think background check? So if you were to tell the people, the citizens, regular people like that want to maybe thinking about getting into law enforcement, what all does a background entail? And of the current systems that you've seen, because I'm sure you've gotten to see how other people do it and how the department you retired from does it and all that stuff, like pros and cons. Like what advice would you have for them to avoid nowadays, or what would you tell them to embrace to improve their backgrounds?
Yeah, I think the hardest part about backgrounds is that departments can't hire fast enough to fill, the departures and just the vacancies that exist. And in doing that, they'll get real myopic on, we got to get people in this department. And so they speed the process up to try to meet hiring needs rather than hire the quality individuals that you want. I'm not suggesting that with speed you can't get quality people. You can, but there's also the risk of mistakes during those backgrounds when you're pressing for one to be done is really great. And I don't know the exact time frame, but there's a national group that says background should take blank time, and I think it's around 12 weeks to do one background properly.
Okay.
And I think Fort Worth was getting around 4 weeks of doing them, and that could be pretty uncomfortable, especially for a person in the rank of a sergeant or a lieutenant or all the way up to the chief, signing off on a background saying, we know this was executed completely properly. Everything that was done, they've been vetted 100%, and I'm going to put my name on that. Because if something really goes south with that person, the investigators from externally or lawyers, they're going to start looking up first and go, why did you approve of that background? So it can really create issues if you don't take your time, slow them down and do them. And I'll give you an example. In 1994, injured officers were sent down to the academy. 93, 94, they were sent down there to go help with backgrounds because that was the first CCPD money came in then. And that was a huge hiring push for Fort Worth PD. And, they hired 400 or 500 officers over the next few years. So anybody with background experience, and I'd had some before, because they had another injury, they put me down in the academy to do backgrounds. So they kind of put it on all call. If you're injured and if you know how to do backgrounds, come do them. And I walked in the door, and I'm not kidding you, on a Tuesday, and they said, we need 5 backgrounds done by Friday. We're having a review board. And, they said, we're going to give you the stack of backgrounds. They're between 75% and maybe 90% done. You just need to do some follow-up and get them turned in. We've got to have these on Friday. And I, nervously went, okay, this is your sergeant, your boss telling you what they need. So you're in the yes, sir mode at that moment. So I walk back, start flipping through some of them. And one of the first ones I found that was about 90% done, the guy had like a dozen warrants out for his arrest. So, we literally, and I don't know if they still do that now, but we called him in and we arrested him. And so that was my first one done, because it didn't matter if it was done, put them in front of the board. It was done. Okay, well, he's out now. Had another guy that had 2 felony convictions out of North Carolina. And these things I remember, they stick with you. And, and it was, okay, he's done. And those were 90% completed backgrounds. Wow. At that point. And it tells you the pressure that everyone else was under to get these done, and some of the errors that were made. And 2 of them I found within about 10 minutes. And I went back to the sergeant. He's a fantastic man, great sergeant to work for. And I said, you know what? I'd kind of rather go either to communications or anywhere. I'll go sit at a desk and answer phones. I don't want to do this. And he's kind of looked. He said, well, why not? And I said, I just don't want to be a part of something that's this risky. I said, well, y'all are doing it right. And I don't want to do a background if I don't have the time I need to really do one. And he goes, well, what kind of time? I said, well, I mean, you're really talking, 6, 8 weeks to do one. And he goes, well, we don't have that. And he goes, but do what you can. And he goes, and do them right. And, the message that he sent me, looking me in the eye, saying, do what you can and do them right, was, I can't openly tell you I'm going to give you 6 to 8 weeks. But when he looked at me and knowing who this sergeant was, and he said, do it right, he just told me, take all the time you need to do these backgrounds. Yeah. And I did. And he never chirped about it one time after that. So all that to say, you need time. And I think if you told anyone in the community that, well, we're hiring people after looking at them for 4 weeks, we're putting them through this whole process, and it may be longer than that. I may be exaggerating a little bit, but even 6 weeks is not enough. And I'm saying that from somebody who, my background was 6 weeks long. It wasn't enough, you know, and I'm not saying I hid anything or there were things unknown. I was a local kid. I was easy to do. And some of them that could be that fast, but by and large, you need to really have time. And these investigators that are working down there now, they need to know that they have that amount of time. If there's one that's a problem, that you're not on an artificial schedule, you're on the schedule that says, I need this to go longer. And, to make sure, and I can say this knowing that in internal affairs and in SIU and even in major case, if you had a younger officer, a lot of the times the first thing we would do is say, I want their background book. I want to see, should they have been in this department in the first place? And, it was one with real egregious, kind of complaints. It wasn't just, hey, well, he was rude to me on a traffic stop kind of complaint, but was there something in there that was missed? And, a lot of times you'll figure out that ones that came through in those periods where they had shortened backgrounds, real compressed timelines are going to start being your primary problem officers. And, and that's been confirmed over and over and over again, that if you don't do good backgrounds, you're going to create problems for yourselves in about 2 to 3 years, because it's going to come out.
Yep.
So, I think the people in the community would be more comfortable knowing that, you're following national guidelines, and you could use that as your, I know we need officers on the street, but nationally, this is what's recommended. This is the best practices, and this is how we're going to operate. And we're not going to change the way we do things just for the sake of getting a body into a uniform, because that's the last thing you want.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the long term, bigger pictures, picture idea frame. So it could, and you tell me in your experience, the moment an officer gets in trouble, the first two things they look at: training and background.
Absolutely.
That's the first two things.
Yeah.
Those are the first two things they look at. Not in that particular order, but those are the first things they start pulling. So if you are one of those guys that snuck in, and I don't want to make this sound like it's a epidemic in the one spot that you worked. It's a problem all over the nation.
Oh, absolutely.
And I get the argument, like, you need police officers. And if you don't have enough, I mean, you have to look your citizens in the eyes as well and say, like, well, do you want us to kind of bend the rules a little bit? Not necessarily the rules, but just streamline this so we can get some people out there and hope for the best. Some people are willing to gamble that.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, it falls back. I'm the father of 3 kids, and, get your homework done. And 10 minutes later, the homework's done, and it's magical. And it's like, did you do it all? And, and it's like, do you want to do it faster? Or do you want to do it right?
Yeah.
Because there's a balance in there. And again, like I said, I'm not trying to pile on to anyone or to, my former department and say that they're not doing it right, because there's really good investigators there that are doing everything they can possibly do to ensure that the person that's going to back you up or any of your friends up when they get out is a good quality officer, and they're doing the best they can with what they've been given to work with.
Right.
Every department in the country is facing that same exact thing, and some a lot worse than Fort Worth. I don't know how many officers down Fort Worth is right now, but it's too many no matter what. And then, I saw somebody posted recently on Facebook, that, Fort Worth's now the 12th largest city in the country. Think about that. Fort Worth, Texas is the 12th largest city in the country, and it has a department that's smaller than, almost every major city in the country. And the question has to be why. And, and that's something that the citizens, the department, they need to get with our mayor and with city council and say, we got to grow.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to say when you're trying to just fill empty spots, but there's not enough officers to work in this city as it is. And, so that's the other side of that challenge is we can't fill the empty spots, but we also realistically need to hire probably 500 or 600 more to even put you in a position to properly police this city, because we're the 12th largest city in the entire country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things too, where I personally, if I'm an officer and I'm down that far, I'm like, yeah, get these bodies in here. So it's a balance with yourself as somebody that works at a place that's behind. You're like, Yeah. You look at your background guys like, hey, come on, dude, get them through.
Right. Well, sure. And I'll say this, and here, let's flip all the way back to social skills. Okay. The best recruiters in the entire police department are the officers that are out on the street, bar none. Mm-hmm. The recruiting unit can only go out and hand out so many flyers and squeezy balls with the Fort Worth PD logo on it to try to attract officers. But people that are going to want to come to the department, or they're kind of leaning that way, their interaction with you out on the street could make the difference in us getting a really good quality person in our department, or them going somewhere else. But your ability to recruit somebody, and when I was in the background in recruiting section. I even suggested at one point, put out a little, kind of a little headhunter bounty, for officers out on the street. Give them a bonus if they bring in an officer. If it's I came here because Officer X recruited me to this department.
Yeah.
If that person makes it to the end of the academy and graduates, and you could even say they make it through a year of probation, but I would say if they make it to graduation, give that officer an extra $100, or 200, or whatever. You're able to do that. You could do something along those lines. Give some incentives for officers to go, you know what? It's not going to hurt me to just hand a flyer out to somebody that I meet on the, in the neighborhood, probably not on the street corner, but occasionally. But, and bring them in. You're the best face of the department that exists, period. And that's in every department.
Yeah.
So, that's an important thing that goes back to the social skills. We need you to help us recruit because you want good officers working with you. You can kind of pick them out sometimes.
Yeah.
So go out and do that.
Yeah. I never looked at it as recruiting, but I know that specifically some of the things I've done, I mean, anytime I can tell somebody's staring at me and I can tell they got a question, like, you can tell, and I'll see them staring at the body cam or something like that. And I'll be like, I'll start taking off. Hey, you want to see it?
Yeah.
And I'll start educating about what it is, what it does, what its capabilities are, how long the battery lasts. I'll just dive into it. And, little things like that, as long as you can just talk about whatever it is that they're curious about, that's it. That's enough.
Yeah, it is. And if you have an opportunity to, some officers might go, okay, it's sounding a little cheesy or a little hokey, but I was going through the line at Cousin's Barbecue one day, and it was before I retired, and this little girl that was working there, she goes, oh, I remember you. You came to my class at Pascal High School and talked to us about being a police officer. She goes, I'm in the police academy right now because of that.
Nice.
And it was kind of a no kidding moment. And look, I've got a face for radio and a voice for none of it. So the fact that, somebody remembered something I had to say was pretty good. Well, what it was, a friend that had worked in an at-risk student population at Pascal, where I went to high school, knew I was an officer, reached out and said, do you think you'd be interested in, just talking about your career to these kids and letting them know, well, Pascal is largely minority and lower socioeconomic status kids who generally aren't going to have an interaction, a positive interaction sometimes, with an older white guy, police officer. And, it surprised me a little bit, that they wanted me to come in and talk. And I went, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And then I went back twice a year, every year for probably, I'm guessing, the last 10 years of my career.
Okay.
Talk to these kids. And had one that stopped me and said, I'm in the police academy right now because of you coming to visit with us. Okay, great.
Makes the last 10 years worth it.
Yeah.
Or whenever
really
it occurred.
Yeah, it was really a neat feeling to get that. So, if somebody approaches you and says, would you be interested in talking to a group? Well, you may not be comfortable. I really wasn't. I think almost any cop will tell you, even having a microphone in a room with a guy I've known, for quite some time, it's frightening. I'd rather be shot at. So don't put me in front of a group of people, but you can convey stories, or you can, make a connection to a kid or someone a lot easier than you think you can. Mm-hmm. So just go give it a shot. Yeah. And you know what? If it's not your thing, going back to finding that right person, then go find somebody that it is their thing.
Yeah.
And I did that also because I was asked, the same group asked me to go to Northside High School. And I actually went and found a sergeant that, I kind of put out a message, hey, does anybody know anybody that went to Northside High School? I had a connection with Pascal. Well, I had a sergeant that sent me a message that says, yeah, I went to Northside. And I said, would you be interested in doing this? Like, yeah, that'd be great. He had a connection there, and it worked. And I remember I went, and I sat in on the, his meeting with these kids, and they loved it because they identified with this person that was there with them. And, so find somebody that'll do it with you or for you, and it makes a big difference.
Yeah. So on the background checks, we talked about the negative side, the having to rush through,
right?
Which is it's a give and take, because you have to balance with the needs of the citizens, the needs from city council and the mayor and what they push, and then the needs of your department and knowing what you can and can't do. So the community now knows what to try to avoid if you can, but what practices did you guys do that were really good that you saw?
The process that, assigning an investigator and giving them, their individual and expanding the background unit also. When I got down there, they needed probably an additional 20 people. We asked for, I think, 24. And, of course, they gave us, 4 out of that 24 we asked for. But for them to be able to connect with an officer and the preferences for people pretty seasoned in their careers that, have been around enough on the street, and in the department to know what are we looking for. So, you want to take people with some experience down there if you can and let them start looking because they know, and sometimes it's your gut feelings about something, and something's not right and they can put it on paper. But, the process itself, it's, for a lot of it, it's fill in the blanks for the person applying for the job, and you tell them, you're going to write your biography here for us and leave nothing out at all. And, and by and large, they'll do it. The ones that don't are what gets caught by the investigators or through the process and they get weeded out. And I think the investigators do a good job, of really digging in and researching. They're taught really well up until Facebook, really blocked things a couple of years ago and tightened down their security measures. But, the investigators were trained well to look into the things that aren't on paper, and start looking into the social media and start looking into the areas. And, these applicants had to come in and basically give the investigators access to their social media. And that's where you'd really start catching a lot of things in the process, is that people will put things on social media that, are reasons maybe not to be hired. And it could even be reasons to be hired. You never know.
Right.
But the access to that was important. The investigators were well trained to what to look for. And sometimes I would, they would go, "Hey, come here, Lieutenant, and look at this." And they'd show me something. I'm like, wow.
How the hell did you find that?
Yeah. How did you dig into that? And they would explain it. And I still don't understand it to this day. But, going through that process and looking at everything, I mean, they're putting their life down there. And, the investigators are cautious about going through it. And again, they have to sign off on this. They're having to put their name on a piece of paper saying, I have done everything I could possibly do to ensure this person is the right person for this job. And I think they take it seriously. And so the psychologicals that they do are far better than the ones that, were done when I came through.
Yeah. Do you like to kill animals? Yes.
Yeah.
Did you do that as a kid? Yes.
Yeah.
That's not enough. I need more.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you'd have, a guy I called in for one background and I asked, we just sat down and started talking and I said, I'd see you like to hunt. And he goes, "Oh man, I can't, yes, I am. You're a hunter?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, a couple of months ago, he goes, actually about a month ago, me and my buddy went out and we shot some deer, over it. And, for a hunter, for me, I went, okay, well, we're having this discussion in June and deer season ended in January.
Yeah.
So you're a poacher. And, and I didn't say it out loud, but
let him keep talking.
He kept talking.
Yeah.
And then the questions became, so what kind of guns from this guy? He's like, what kind of guns do you let us carry? I mean, can we carry and I mean, it really started just evolving into that.
Desert Eagles, can we carry
you
those?
Got it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, and so you knew these personality traits in this guy were coming out. And also he's admitted to something that he's done that violated the law that he didn't put in that background book. So it was an easy ride out. You watch these investigators in their interviews and the process that they go through, and you see that exact thing. They make these connections and they go through and they, dig stuff out and get that person out that doesn't really belong there.
Yeah.
And, so, I would say the bulk of the investigations that, when I was there, I was comfortable that when I put my name on it, that it was done well. And I think that most of the people that are now in that same position that I was in at the time I was there probably feel the same way.
Yeah.
You've got to put good quality investigators in place that have the training and the skill set to do those things. Social skills, investigative skills. I mean, it all works together.
Technology skills.
Technology skills is
Yeah.
really big. And
Yeah.
like I said, and that goes back to what you said about departments maybe don't use social media well enough, to do to create the public face they want, but in the back and behind the scenes, your people are using social media exactly how you want them.
Yes. Yeah. I a part of it was to me is that, one, social media is a great tool in just investigative work for the police.
Yeah.
But it's severely lacked as far as reaching the community.
Right.
It's nice to post, your feel-good stories, and I think those are important.
Sure.
But what are they learning? There's education is how you bring each other together.
Yeah.
Because it's the unknown. Citizens have questions because they don't know. And if they don't have anybody telling them anything, they're just showing them these feel-good stories. Well, they're not learning. We're not bridging any gaps that way. It's nice on the surface, but to me, it's just propaganda. I think it has its place. We need it because social media in itself is filled with so much negative stuff anyway.
Right. And I remember when our department first started kind of delving into the social media world, and it was the Star Wars, video. It was super popular. Everybody loved it.
It's awesome.
But then, but people then started asking that exact question. Okay, now what?
Yeah.
Where do you go from there? And some cops are slightly cynical.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, about all this.
Yeah.
And, so they don't want any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And they also don't want they don't want the police saying anything about anything. It's just,
right.
It's nobody's business but our own, what we do here. Balancing in between is not an easy thing. And I think the department has done a better job of going from Star Wars to where they're at now, but there's still a lot to do.
Yeah. And it's departments everywhere. Like you said, it's improving, and I think it's improving. And I think personally that whether somebody else who's better at this stuff than me takes over and does their own thing, or maybe they have something just like what I'm doing already out there, I'm just not aware of it yet. More power to them. I just want it to improve police work in general, and I want it to improve relationships with people. So if somebody else takes the helm and they do a way better job, if you could get The Rock and some other cop or what, I don't care. If you can get them to do a podcast and it helps do this, cool.
Yeah.
But I think this idea will open up eyes and show that people crave to know what you do and what you've done and why and how and all that stuff. And whether it's, a small crowd or a big crowd, that information, it's the spider web effect or broken glass type thing that it will spread. And I think that this is a key feature to it, is getting guys like you talking about the bad for background investigations and the good. The good thing that I really want the citizens to take away from what you talked about is knowing that your social media starts your reputation. So if you have any interest in going into not just law enforcement, but anything that does any sort of background check, social media can get you in trouble.
Yeah, it can. And, and even, and we would do that, we'd have pictures of just knuckleheaded behavior that, it's not atypical of a 18 or 19-year-old.
Yeah.
But once it's out there, it's out there. And, I noticed recently on a forum about officers, and that retired officer saying something pretty negative about another officer, a current officer. And I thought about it, and I almost stay out of those phrases all the time.
Yeah.
It's not worth it. And I responded asking, why would you do that? There's 1,000 ways to ask this question, but why did you ask it this way? Because what you did was attack this person's character rather than just ask the actual question that you were asking. And the problem with that is when it's in the social media realm, it's just there.
Yeah.
And, I've learned through when I was in backgrounds and now as doing private investigations, how actually easy it is to
get deleted shit.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely is. It's real simple to find stuff that people don't want you to see. And, so they need to be real cautious. If you think you want to be a police officer, firefighter, something like that with a real background investigation done, ensure that what you're putting out there is, it's what your mama wants to see.
Yeah.
It's that simple. But getting back to the backgrounds, one of the other things that I think is when I was there, and I always like to think the best of, and I'm sure it still happens this way. The final interview, the board, as they call it. And, people always worry about, or is somebody's fingers in this, or is somebody kind of trying to manipulate the board to go one way or the other. And I found that the people on the board did a good job of, we would send them the books, and it was always refreshing when they would walk in and you would see pages of notes that they have taken that, that they went through and they read it and they're concerned about, something they saw in this. And, and one sergeant, real good friend of mine, he called me one night and he says, hey, have you seen this in this one background book? And I was like, well, no, clearly we hadn't. And he goes, I'm going to send it to you. He said, you really need to look at this because I don't think this person even needs to get to this part of the process. He goes, this is pretty bad. And it was just something that got overlooked. It was in there and he was right. And we all had a discussion that morning and went and told this kid, hey, you know what, this is a reason to write you out of the process. And it made me feel confident that, people that were coming into those review boards as reviewers were taking their job seriously, and they were. And it's a long day. Being on a review board is not easy because you're just one after another having these kids come through, and it could be 20-minute long interview because they're the golden child, and or it could be a 45-minute or hour interview that you're just grinding through to try to figure out, is this person really upfront with us, or that, are they qualified to be in this department? So you've got the background review process that I think is done well in our department. And, and some of the things we changed when I was there, and I don't know if they did it with you, but they did it with me. They asked you cop questions.
Oh, yeah. They video it. Yeah. Old school video recording.
Old school video recording, but they ask cop questions. And they ask you the question, if you're driving down the highway and you have a prisoner and there's a wreck and people are trapped in the car, what are you going to do? I don't know. I've never done that before.
Yeah.
That's not the right answer, because, they want you. And so people would start formulating their answers around cop questions. And it was the pat, well, I would first call my supervisor and tell you, let him know what I'm, and then I would go do this. And they would try to answer and form that exactly around what they know they want, to hear is, I'm going to follow every rule and every policy possible to make this happen, to make this work, and no freelancing allowed.
Yeah.
And it was a bad policy for us in the department of asking cop questions of people that have never been cops before, because you've got guys and girls that are coming in that are straight out of college. That's their only life experience. Some that have been butchers all their life, that's the only experience they have, and they can't answer those questions in any way but pat. And they can go online and you can look up how to answer review board questions. There's thousands and thousands of them, and all of them are the pat answers, and they'll give them to you.
Yeah.
And that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for that honest, upfront, 2-hour podcast, I want to get to know you answer.
Yeah.
And so we changed that. And if you were, at least when I was there, if you have no police experience, we're not going to ask these questions anymore. We're going to ask other questions about your life and work experiences that we think will, be more beneficial to us in the department. And then if you had prior military sometimes, or law enforcement experience, we're going to ask you some other sets of questions. And we had 2 different sets. And I think it helped, in my opinion, to be able to ask those questions that way, because it kept you from getting the standard internet answer to questions that had no relevance to these people at all. And they didn't have any, because they had never experienced that. And I actually liked the ones that kind of shrugged their shoulders and went, I don't know. And it frustrated some of the background, group that they go, well, that's not an answer. And they're like, but I don't know. I've never done this. Give me a chance.
Yeah. Teach me.
Teach me
how to handle that.
And I might be pretty good
How
at it.
do you want to handle it? I'll do that.
Yeah.
When I went through, because I was prior, and I can't remember what was asked in my other agency at all. But when I had went through, they'd asked me a deadly force situation question, and then a pulling your mother over question, right. Yeah. And I got a good chuckle out of them because they asked, okay, you're working a traffic control detail, and you pull over a vehicle, and you discover it's your mother driving the vehicle, and they're like, what do you do? I'm like, well, what was the offense? They're like, she was doing 35 over. I'm like, oh yeah, she's getting a ticket, and I'm gonna laugh about it. And they're like, your own mother. I'm like, all the time she grounded me, I missed out on a whole summer of my childhood one time. I was like, payback. They all started laughing. I was like, but that's the truth. That's what I would do.
Well,
sorry, Ma. Love you.
Yeah. So I think it was in y'all's first podcast, and Tino talked about, so he's a hometown kid also. I'm pretty sure he grew up in Diamond Hill, Northside area or somewhere.
And that's where he polices.
Yeah. So I can identify with, pulling your own mother over. Now, I never pulled my mom over, but I grew up in Fort Worth, and it is difficult because you have anxieties about when am I going to run across one of my, somebody I know.
A friend, family, something.
The very first, during training, my first month of training was on day shift. My second month was on midnight shift. And the first police chase I got in was a guy that I'd known since kindergarten.
Oh.
And he was one of the more notorious drug dealers in Fort Worth.
Did you know that going into the pursuit?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because everybody got on the radio and said, and, I could say his name, but they said, hey, it's David, and they said his last name because everybody in that division knew exactly who that was, and he could drive. I mean, it was.
Oh, he had skill.
Oh, he was skilled. I mean, if he ran from you, he was probably going to get away. And so my training officer, we were at the Bolt Street sector, and I knew that David's grandparents lived on Rutland right off of Seminary Drive. And I told him, I said, go to his grandparents' house. That's where he's going to go. And he says, hell no, you go get in this chase right now. We were miles from that chase.
So you were in probation? Or
I was in training as a rookie.
Dude, that's a very insightful senior move.
Yeah, and he says, go get in this chase. And I said, I'm telling you, I know this guy. I've known him my entire life.
I know where he's going.
Except for when he's in prison. We didn't talk much, but I know where he's going. His grandparents, I know where his house is. I was there hundreds of times during my childhood. And he says, nah, you go get in this chase. So we go get in the chase briefly, and he gets away. And we had a SWAT call out at his grandparents' house that lasted about the next 9 hours. And so, when he finally comes out, it was interesting. When Andy Carter was the one that was putting the handcuffs on him. And he was laying over the trunk of a car, and he looked over at me. He goes, is that old Winky Hicks standing there in a police uniform? Yeah, David, it's me.
What's up, buddy?
Yeah, and
wish it could have been under better terms.
And I'll say this: what I really admired about that training sergeant or training officer that I had at the time. So we go back to the sergeant's office, later on that morning at the end of the SWAT call out that was completely unnecessary. But that corporal, the sergeant says, "Well, how'd the kid do?" And he goes, "Well, I got to be honest with you." He said, we would have never been in that if I'd listened to him. Yeah. And I was like, I was dumbfounded at that moment for that training officer. He goes, because he knew where he was going to go, and he went exactly where
he said he would.
Hey. And he goes, I should have listened to him. And, you talk about a lesson as a, 5 weeks in training rookie. Yeah. To have a corporal go, I was wrong about this.
And owned it. In front of a supervisor.
And back in those days, that could get you, chewed out privately real easily by that boss or a bad review. Yeah. And it just, I was amazed that he did. And, we walked out and, that after the shift was over and we're walking our cars and he even said, he goes, we always think we're right, because I've been out here for 12 years doing this and, we don't listen to rookies.
Yeah,
we
the culture.
We train you. Yep. You don't train us. And he goes, we're good. Yep. It was appreciated but impressive more than anything else to have a guy like that. Yeah. Training you, because for the next, 3.5 weeks, you're like, this guy was going to be really good. Yeah. And it was. I learned a lot from him.
That's awesome. Yeah. When I was a trainer, I try to tell everybody, I'm like, listen, you're all dummies as far as police work goes. said, but your life experiences are going to bring something to the table. So it doesn't matter that I've got more police experience or training than you. You're always going to have something to bring to the table. I was like, and if you can keep that in mind when you get to where I'm at, you're going to have a great impression on the people underneath you, and you're going to enrich your own training because you're willing to listen to other people that, who cares? They throw out a dumb idea. At least give them a chance to explain it. Maybe it's a perspective you hadn't considered.
Sure.
And that's just the kind of the way I've looked at things. Now, if it's something dynamic and a decision needs to be made right now, I'm going to go with my experience.
Sure.
That's not idea time.
Yeah.
But so I could see where that FTO may have thought. But man, you tell me that story, and I'm sitting back thinking in my head, I'm like, no, that absolutely makes sense. Like if you knew where this dude lives and you know his habits and tendencies, just I'm going with that. I don't care who you are. You could have been Joe Schmo off the street. Like, right. Oh yeah, he always goes over this place. Yeah. Well, shit, I'm gonna go over there.
Yeah, yeah, it was interesting, and you know, and I, you know, like I said, the growing up in the hometown, working as a cop in your hometown, and Ralph Mendoza was a hometown kid also.
Yeah,
so he, you know, and he was a good mentor to me in the department and all the way through my career. But we also knew each other before I ever started.
The Mendoza Mafia.
Yeah, there you go. And Ralph treated me well. And so, but, you know, getting in a foot chase and, you know, as a rookie officer, you know, somewhere after that and running down, you know, between Tennessee and Hattie and, you know, in an alley and a guy looking over his shoulder and, man, it hits you and you're like, geez, I recognize that guy. And you realize, oh yeah, he was the, you know, so-and-so from high school. And I yelled out his name. I was like, hey, Brooks, stop running, man, stop running. I know who you are. And I was not going to catch him. You know, there was no question I was not going to catch him. But you could see that epiphany that
like go crap.
Off. Yeah.
They know who I am.
His body just kind of get the language. And all of a sudden he just turned around and looked and he's like, he didn't throw up his hands, but it was just like
what do I do?
What do I do now? You know who I am. So he just stopped and he just walked back. He's like, okay, you know, and he kind of looked at me with I kind of know you, but you know, and I told him who I was and he goes, oh yeah, I remember you.
Yep.
You know?
Now the only way I can relate to that, because I didn't grow up where I work now, and is you get frequent flyers, ones that you have arrested over and over and over. And I had one not too long ago that I've arrested him 4 or 5 times as a detective.
Right.
I've arrested him that many times. Like I like to go out in the field and do my thing. So, and then I took over that property crimes team, and so I'm out with the team all the time anyway. So we end up running into this dude again.
Sure.
He sees me, I see him, and he's never tried to run before. I mean, that wasn't even a thought in my head. But for people that don't know, when people are going to run, they start looking around, and the telltale signs are there. They're looking for an avenue, and you can hear me on my body cam. I'm like, hey, Snuffy, that sounds real name. Don't run.
Yeah.
And as soon as I say that, choom, he takes off running. We caught him. It wasn't a big deal, but afterwards he's like, well, I never ran from you before. I wasn't sure if I could get away. I was like, you can't. Yeah. I was like, you just learned you can't. Well, I ain't going to run from you again. I was like, you knew it was me. I know who you are. Why are you running? He's like, I don't know. I'm high. It's like, well, at least you're honest.
Yeah, there you go. So, give you credit.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit,
sure.
sir. I'm very interested in your IA experience.
Okay.
So I'm going to say on behalf of community concerns that I've heard in the past, and that I've even actually had the same thoughts before, and I still don't know the right answer because I have no experience with IA. First, the argument is something major happens and the IA is investigating their own people. Well, of course, they're going to look out for them. They're going to they're going to overlook things for the officers, such and such. That's the concern. So it always looks bad when you have an internal group looking into an issue with another officer that they could be friends with or that they work with. So there's the first concern. And can you explain first what IA's role is, what they're supposed to look into and all that, and then kind of address that issue?
Sure. The whole internal affairs idea is that, officers who get out of line, who violate policy, and sometimes on the rare occasions commit a criminal act or something egregious like that, that the concerns can be brought to the department and they can be investigated. And I mean, it's really that simple that somebody's going to look at it. And, and that's where, you want some really experienced people. At one point, the department's bounced around for years. So when I first started, it was sergeants assigned to there. And then it actually went to lieutenants at one point assigned to IED as investigators. And then it went back down to sergeants again. I think it's corporals now. I'm not real sure if it is or not. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. It needs to be somebody with at least enough tenure and experience, and also that is the rank of a supervisor to do these investigations. I just don't think, I'm not saying that there can't be good quality investigators at the corporal level. There can, but there comes with the rank and the tenure some degree of experience, and also respect that comes with that from officers.
Yeah.
To trust the work you're doing, because quite frankly, if I'm, a 10 or 12 year officer and I walk into internal affairs and there's a 6-year corporal sitting there in front of me, I'm going to question.
I'm screwed.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to question just at least a little bit. Do they have the experience and the training to really dig into this? Because this could be my career, or in bad circumstances, this could be me going to jail if this isn't done right. And particularly if you've done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
You want that experience. So I never agreed with the change out of the rank of sergeant. Lieutenants would probably be a little over the top, at this point, but sergeants were the right one for me. So I actually volunteered to go I wanted to go to IED.
Yep. And
it was based on the advice of Brad Johnson. He's a retired, officer from Fort Worth. He was a sergeant. He was one of the best people I ever worked for. And
I know Brad.
Yeah. So
it's good too.
And he told me, one time, and I was an officer, and he said, Wink, as you work your way through your career and you promote up and you start doing that, he said, I'm telling you, go to internal affairs. He said, that is, you will learn the nuts and bolts, and you also learn where all the bones are buried.
Yeah.
As well. And he said, but there's nowhere to learn the department process better than that. And, it just, in the back of my mind, I tucked it away with oh, hell no, I'll never go to IED. It's who wants to go there? I'd been there maybe once or twice at that point. And, so it was, but,
as somebody who's being investigated.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, so the reverse of that, was, going there as being someone investigated. If you tell me today, right now, as a police officer, if when a DPS trooper pulls up in your mirror, it doesn't make you nervous.
Makes you pucker.
It does. When you get the call from internal affairs, even though you've done nothing wrong, you're still puckering. It's no different than the cop in your mirror. It's uncomfortable, and you really need to know that when you walk in there that the people are going to be professional, they're going to do their jobs, and and the facts are going to come out. And that's the assignment you want there, as people that are just going to follow the facts. It can be really, really uncomfortable doing that as a person assigned to that unit. You're going to see some things and hear some things you thought you never would. And, so that's my spiel about who should be assigned there. And I wanted to go there. And the very first chance I got, I knew somebody that was leaving. I, sent Ralph Mendoza, he was chief at the time, a message and said, hey, I know there's going to be a vacancy in IED. I'm interested.
So did you go there as a sergeant or lieutenant?
A sergeant.
Okay.
Yeah. So at the time I was there, it was just sergeants assigned to that unit.
Okay.
Yeah. And the lieutenant thing was an experiment, at one point, probably 5 or 6 years before that, and it didn't work. And
Gotcha.
So they had flipped back to sergeants.
Yeah.
So, I went, I had good teachers in there. Yeah. But one of the things I learned real quickly also that, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I started seeking out training, and I was fortunate that, I was able to go to some really good seminars all over the country and got some good, textbook lessons on what we should be doing or how we could operate and good way to do good investigations. And then I had to trust myself on a lot of it, that I could do it right. So the process, or that whole question about, can you police yourselves? Absolutely you can. There's no question you can. And it even goes back to the background investigation kind of thing. Are you really going to put your name on something or sign off on an investigation on a complaint that is not done right? Because it still goes back to, if you do that, and say the Justice Department comes in and takes a look, or attorneys start deposing people, and they find out that you're the weak link, you're the one that didn't do your job, or that you intentionally covered something up.
Now you're going to jail.
Yeah, now you're investigated by, blank, and it's going to be less comfortable than having IAD investigate you. I can assure you of that. So the idea that police can't police themselves is nonsense. And people don't understand, they only see internal affairs movies or how it works on TV, and it's always corrupt, because that makes good TV. That, it's just everybody's littered with bad guys, and it's just not the case. I never questioned an investigation that was done while I was in IAD by the people that were around me or that I had done. And I thought we did a really good job. And, we transitioned chiefs during that time. And, one of the things I never liked about internal affairs was the inability to prosecute people for coming in and making false complaints. And there were a lot of those.
Oh.
But our department, and they had a policy. It was, we don't care. If somebody comes in and violates the law and swears under oath that an officer did something, and we prove factually they didn't do it, we have all the evidence we need to say they didn't do it, but the whole notion of it will cause a chilling effect and the citizens won't come and make complaints, that's also nonsense. What it does is it lets the officers know that we support you when somebody comes in and lies about you.
Yeah.
And it also tells the citizens, don't come in and make up lies about officers, because we'll investigate it properly, and either direction it goes, we're going to follow it. And so I didn't like that. Chief Halstead comes in while I was in IAD, probably about a year after I was assigned there. And, what are some of the things you'd like to see done differently here? And one of the things we brought up was, we've had some real egregious, complaints made against some officers, and we're not allowed to do anything about it. Nothing. And we can't pursue criminal, and it's not just a he said, she said, or a she said, he said moment. It is, they've walked in and they've made this, and we have actual video, we have evidence, or we have their, recant testimony that they made it all up, and we just have to bury it at that point.
Yeah.
And he went, well, that's kind of stupid. He goes, you have my blessing if you have something like that. And he goes, talk to the DA's office. If they're comfortable with it, then let's look at it. And I think during my time there, we pursued either 2 or 3 arrests for forging forging a government document because they'd sworn out a statement that was blatant lie, and even a perjury charge on one person. Because we swore them in, and we had them. We knew that they were coming in to lie, and we knew that ahead of time. We knew what they were doing. They had called and made up this complaint, and we had already collected the evidence. We knew what they were doing, and we actually had them swear to an oath before they wrote their name on it, and they let us pursue a perjury charge on that person.
In a given month or year, how often are false claims, like provable false, not just, well, we couldn't prove any fact, but...
Right. During my time there, that kind of, provable false claim, we probably had 6 to 12 come in, maybe one a month that was just demonstrably, this is just bullshit. It is.
Yeah.
And, here's the evidence. And you would still have people that would sit there despite the evidence in front of them and go, no, it happened. We're like, okay. And they were shocked when we would come arrest them and go, now you get to tell your story in court.
Yeah.
About how you think this still occurred despite all of this.
And if anybody looks at that as like, well, that's wrong. I would put yourself in the person's shoes that's being falsely accused.
Sure.
And then what the potential outcome would have been had you didn't do your job.
Right.
and just went along with what somebody said.
Yeah.
They could be more than likely, if it's egregious, is this something that they could go to jail for? So
Yeah.
I would hope that you would want that background, that investigation to be taken just as serious as if the allegations were on you.
Yeah, for sure. And, and one of the early pieces of advice I got, even when a sergeant, she knew I was going to IED, and she pulled me aside, and it was, hey, Wink, just remember this. She had been in IED. She said, the more outlandish it is, the more likely it is to be true. That was her little axiom.
Okay.
And I kind of kept that in mind, and myself and another sergeant had gotten, somebody coming in to make a complaint one day. And we were just kind of sitting there just taking these notes and looking at each other, just going, I mean, this is as out there as anything we had heard, and taking these notes. And so I walked out and I go start, pulling up call screens and stuff. And I'm sitting there just scratching my head going, holy cow, this is actually, I mean, these things match up, what he's telling us. And I walked back in and kind of showed a note to the other investigator, and you could almost see him brace a little bit. And he was like, what the fuck? Yeah. I mean, it was that moment. So it came around, that advice that she had given, the most outlandish complaint I had ever taken in IED, 100%. Absolutely true. Every bit of it.
So I'm glad you bring that up, because one of the arguments I made is or one of the things I hear quite a bit from people that are outside of law enforcement is cops aren't held accountable. They're never held accountable. Their stuff gets squashed and is pushed to the side. Now, I've never been in your position, but I know I have read and heard of officers being fired or charged with crimes that end up being convictions later on, but every year. Mm-hmm. Every year. Now, that's at least once a year, and I'm sure it's more than that, but that's just within the departments I've worked.
Right.
Not to mention nationwide. So with you being in your experience for your time in IA, you can attest that people have been fired or charged.
Oh, absolutely.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just don't hear about it in the news because you did what you're supposed to do.
Right.
You held them accountable.
Yeah. And, and these days it makes great news.
Yeah.
But when I was in IED, and the years kind of bleed together a little bit, but when I was there, social media didn't exist.
Yeah.
An iPhone right now is in its 11th anniversary, I think, somewhere around there, 11th, 12th anniversary. 12, yeah. So when you think about that, iPhones did not exist when Winky Hicks was an IED sergeant. That's how old I am.
And I think they came out in 2009.
Yeah, so you didn't have a lot of the issues you have today, and in the way things are distorted, and the video that somebody's taking starts 3 minutes after what really started the whole process. It happened. So these videos that start 3 minutes later have only caught the tail end of something, not the front end of it, or not the whole picture. And I'll say this: videos, the cameras that y'all wear, they're, they miss smell, sound, sight, everything that the senses can take in. They record it, but they don't feel it.
Yeah. And
there's a big difference. And so for the whole, for all the nonsense that's out there with all the politicians about, body cameras for everyone, you're really missing the point of what a body camera is and what it does. And it's effective at capturing a moment, but it's not effective at capturing what really occurred, because it only sees in the dimension and also in the, the
field of view
that it is. And it's so limited, it just doesn't give you a real insight into what it is. But I also found that cameras were really, really beneficial to officers. And one of them, I'll give you an example. One of the complaints we had was, an officer was accused of sexual assault. And it was one of these where the person making the complaint had at least enough information that, you had to kind of go, please tell me this isn't this bad. Because they said, well, this officer stopped somewhere along the way and, sexually assaulted me. Well, we start, looking at the GPS on the car, and sure enough, that car had stopped and didn't call out on the radio, and, all this, so it just starts these questions. So the first thing we said was, we sent a couple of investigators to go grab video, go see if that car has a videotape in it. And so they went, grabbed the videotape, brought it back, and popped it in. And thank God that officer did everything correctly. Every single thing. Gets the person in the car, turns the camera around backwards. And this was pre-body camera. All you had was those old junky VHS.
Yep.
So reaches up, you can see him turn the camera around to face back into the back seat with a female prisoner, followed all the procedures. Well, during the time where they were beginning their transport, a shooting, a pursuit, something occurred where the channel was closed. This person's in the back seat, and of course you have it on video because the officer did everything right, and going, I'm going to puke in the back of your car. I got to pull it. You got to stop. So the officer stopped. You can see him get out, open the car, and then, kind of lean the person out once they unbuckled him. And then he walked to the back of the patrol car and stood there with his arms folded with that camera where you can see that officer over the trunk of the car. That person, you can hear him puking, you can hear everything. And he stands there and waits until it's silent and kind of leans over. Are you done? Yeah, I'm done. Okay. Walks back, pushes her back in the car, and goes straight to jail.
Nice.
And that's one of the people we arrested because she came in and swore out this statement that, all this happened. I was sexually assaulted in the back of this car. Well, when we arrested her and brought her back in and said, for an interview, why did you do this? And she said, you know what? I'd gotten in a fight with my husband in the bar and I wanted to make him jealous. That was her reason for wanting to ruin this person's life.
Wow.
Was I wanted to make my husband jealous. So, and honestly, the officer never knew we did the investigation until it was done, till after we'd made the arrest. And then we called him in and said, we just want you to know that this happened. And the only reason that you're sitting here now is because you did everything right that night.
Yes, I would want to know that.
Yeah.
And then it would have reaffirmed to keep doing what I'm doing. But at the same time, I almost would have been like, I wish you wouldn't have told me.
Yeah.
I just wish I'd have been in the dark.
Yeah. But we thought we owed it to that officer. And I'll say this, and like I said, the years blend. And this was actually an SIU investigation rather than an IED, but done the same way, done with the same quality, and done by really good investigators that sniffed through the BS and got to the bottom of it. And, and this officer, later on in life worked for me at some points, and a really good officer. I mean, a really good officer that anybody would want working for them. And thank God he did everything right.
Yeah.
And so that's, any message to citizens that, go, well, officers are covering up for other officers out there. Even that, we didn't cover up for anybody. All we did was follow the facts where they led. And, what was done right saved us, as a department, because then it does look like you're covering it up. If that video doesn't exist, say, we can't prove it one way or the other.
Yeah.
But you've got a sexual assault allegation. And one of the reasons that we also didn't say anything is because that lingers over an officer. If they get called in, you take their gun and badge, or you do these things. And this was a real quick one. I mean, this was like 3 days we got all of this done. But the stigma for an officer, some people internally even are going to go, he just got a break because blank, or they didn't do their job. And then the bulk of the officers, 99.9% of them are going to go, thank God that those guys existed to do their job, because he'd be screwed otherwise.
Yeah.
And so it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So, quality investigators, with some tenure and ability. But, and I'll tell you, that's where it goes to, jumping around a little bit, and I apologize for that.
It's okay.
So the IED to SIU thing, I don't know. Do you have any more questions about the IED stuff?
No, I personally, like you said, I had an IED complaint before. It wasn't for anything criminal. It was minor, really, but I was on a part-time, and I followed policy. I had my body cam with me. And for folks out there, having your body cam when you work off-duty gigs is kind of a pain, because you got to go get it. You got to make sure it's charged up and use it, and you're only using it for a few hours normally, so it's a pain in the butt. But it's policy. So I had it, and I was working a traffic, like on foot traffic detail type thing. And some guy in a Uber Eats, I think it was, parks in a lane of traffic and is like getting out of his car to go make a delivery. And I'm like, hey, dude. I had turn my camera on as I seen the offense like happening. And I could have been a jerk and wrote him a ticket and made him pull his car off to the side and done all that. But I was like, hey, you can't park there, man. You got to. And he makes the argument that just up the road, a UPS truck was doing the same thing. The UPS truck was in a commercial loading and unloading parking spot. I didn't explain that because I shouldn't have to, but that's what it was. And so I look and I'm like, are you talking about the UPS truck? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, he can be there. You can't. You got to move. And that was really the end of it. Well, what he did afterwards was go complain and said that I basically chewed him out, swore at him, stuff like that. And then just like you said, I get a call from IA a couple weeks after and didn't think nothing of it. And they're calling, and immediately like my heart sinks. I'm like, what did I do? What did I screw up? And they're like, hey, do you remember this happening? And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. And they're like, okay, well, just to let you know, we unfounded it. There was no issues. Your body cam told the story. We got everything we needed. I was like, oh, okay, so we're done? And they're like, yep, everything's good. I was like, oh, thank Jesus. Well, what I also didn't know is there's some valet kids. They were valet drivers. And they were a part of that part-time that I was working. Mm-hmm. And they heard the whole thing and were witnesses to it as well. So they were used and also clarified, not just with the body cam, but with what other people said. So,
yeah, like I said, it's the importance of, and it's beat into your head and training and everything else. Follow policy. If you get outside of it, I can't help you. And I will do what we can when punishment comes. And I remember a lieutenant telling us that, policy. If you get outside of it, I'll try to help you as I can, but I can't cover for you for the mistakes you made that violated the rule.
Yeah.
I'll try to mitigate it later, punishment or, whatever it is. But, just understand this is where I'm at and this is where you need to be at. And it's, it's not a bad, way to do things. General orders are general in nature.
Yeah.
There, believe it or not, there's wiggle room sometimes for you to make decisions within general orders that don't violate policy or don't violate the law, that you can, maybe make some decisions that or use discretion that is in the best interest of that moment.
Yeah.
Do you have to follow it black and white 100% of the time? No. Should you? Yeah. It's, you do the best you can. Yep. But the fallibility of who we are as police officers also comes into play. And in an imperfect moment, you're not going to make perfect decisions. And that's the hardest part for people to realize, is that you're just as human as they are, and the standards that they hold you to. Yes, I understand the idea of higher standards, but people throw all of that out the window in big moments and forget the human factors that are involved in it. And that's the hard part, when you're investigating something that everybody's heart was in the right place, and by and large, their head was in the right place also, but just something bad happened during that moment. And, and you feel for people, and that's, I'll say that's the hardest part as an IED investigator, is because when all of that comes into play and you care about what's occurring to that person, sometimes it's hard, to be objective in that moment.
Yeah.
And maybe you need to know when to walk away from that one also. And, and I'll be real honest that I think everybody's got somebody that they may not care a lot for in this department. And I got a complaint one time that came in on an officer I just didn't like. And, I walked back out and I said, anybody, want this, because I can't do it.
Yeah.
I said, I'm just being real honest. I'm biased. I don't like this guy. And I'll take the next really bad one that comes in if anybody will take this off my hands. And, 4 or 5 people are like, hey, I'll take it. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But you better know that those moments, recognize it. But I enjoyed my time in IED, and I'll say this about IED and about SIU and even about major case.
So explain the difference between
So internal affairs, and I'll tell you why we started SIU, because it is so lost on people now, and I don't even know what they do now, but it was really lost when we started that unit. Internal affairs is, to investigate officers' conduct that violates department policy is what that's for. The problem that we had when I was there is you didn't have another unit that investigated criminal conduct. And they would farm that out to the divisions. And, at the time I was, getting up in the corporal ranks, you could be a corporal after 4 years on the job. Mm-hmm. And that was probably not a good thing. And it's better now. But there could be that moment when the old guy assigning cases sees a criminal case come in against another officer, and they go, oh, watch this, we're going to give this to the rookie. And they would hand it divisionally to a rookie or to whoever they didn't like or whoever was in the hot seat that day. So you would have divisional detectives at one point investigating criminal charges against police officers, and then they would hand off their stuff to IAD. After a few years, that changed where internal affairs also did the criminal investigation. So now think about this. In the same room, you would have two sergeants. You would have one sitting on one side of the room, and this happened a couple of times, and one sitting on the other side of the room. One of them was working the internal affairs complaint against an officer policy. And across the room, in a room, where it's sometimes as close as you are to me, a criminal complaint would be investigated in that same exact room, completely violating the rights of the officers or potentially violating the rights of the officers, to have those two separated. And when I would go to training and ask, okay, what do you do in your department? And they would explain it that, well, we have two separate units that do this because, the Garrity rights and the employment rights of the officers, the investigations can really affect one another. And I would tell them what we did. And everywhere I went, no matter what, people would almost choke with, you got to be kidding me. You investigate criminal and internal complaints all in the same room. Yeah. And I mean, it was just, people couldn't believe it at all. So I started looking more and more and more and kind of figured out all these other departments were doing it differently and doing it right. We weren't. And it was, again, when Halstead came in and as the chief, and when he asked that, what do y'all need to do your jobs better? And usually it's, we could really use a new car. We could use some pens and pencils. And I said, here's what we should be doing. And I explained how we did our investigations, and he did the same thing. He almost jaw dropped, and he had been our chief for 2 weeks. And he went, you got to be effing kidding me. Y'all do that in here? And we went, yeah. And he kind of shook his head, and he goes, okay, I got to chew on this a little bit. And about a week later, he came back and he said, well, big guy, it was your idea, and so how would you like to start a unit that separates us? And what officers don't understand, and I'm as guilty of this as any officer, is officers don't understand their rights well enough, employment rights, and don't educate themselves on, if I'm being investigated, what are my rights when I sit down right here? Because I had, one officer, sitting in there with a tenured IAD investigator, and this was when the officer could record the investigation or the interview. And it was by policy, and the internal affairs investigator, sergeant, who had been in there prior to me being there, so had a couple of years of experience, he didn't have a clue that our general orders, and I mean, they got into an argument. I pulled him out and I said, hey, he's allowed to record this interview. You do know that, right? And he went, what do you mean? I'm a sergeant. I'm an internal affairs sergeant. And by God, I'm not being recorded by an officer. I said, it's in the general orders. They're allowed to record this interview. And he's like, well, I'm not doing the interview then. I was like, we're here. This is now. You're doing it. And he's recording it. And he was like, and he was furious with me for days. I was like, it's policy. The officer even knew it. Fortunately.
Yeah. Sounds like he was more mad that he didn't. He was
embarrassed.
He was embarrassed
that he didn't know it. But anyhow, like I said, so you have occasions where even the internal affairs investigators who should know these things also don't know this policy. Officers are bad at educating themselves on how to protect themselves during these investigations. And there's a lot of ways that you can, just your Officer Bill of Rights, knowing, what Garrity is, knowing all of these things and understanding how it affects you and how it affects investigations.
Are you still fresh up on Garrity?
Yeah.
You know it well enough to explain. I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Sure. No, I mean, Garrity's pretty easy, and it actually didn't come from a police investigation. It came from an investigation of waste management or garbage workers it was in New Jersey. And these workers were being investigated for thefts. And when the police got involved, because it was going to be criminal, the employer ordered them and forced them to make statements that implicated themselves in a crime. And so, and they were found guilty and convicted of a crime. And so it worked its way up all the way to the Supreme Court. And one of the people, of course, name was Garrity. And then it was Garrity versus New Jersey. And so the Supreme Court said, your employer can't compel you to make statements against yourself and then take that statement and use it in a criminal investigation. It violates your Fifth Amendment right. And it also violates some other employment rights. But so the convictions were thrown out, and so Garrity was then applied to really all forms of municipal work where your employer can come to you, and they read you this morning for an internal affairs investigation that, that we can compel you to tell us everything about what occurred in this moment. And in that warning, it says, we cannot take this information and give it to the prosecutor. We can't use anything you've said in this moment against you in a criminal proceeding. So everything that is here stays here internally. So the whole issue, that's kind of the quick, version of Garrity. It's an employment right that's given to you. It can't be waived. We hear about waiving Garrity.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. It's not something that can happen. And that became an issue down the road for me when I went to major case also. But so it's an employment right for your protection. And because your employer is forcing you to say something that could implicate you in a criminal.
It's not a replacement for the Miranda warning.
No, not at all. And it was used that way by our department in some periods. So, and so an internal investigation that's done by internal affairs where they use Garrity cannot be handed over to criminal investigators. So, but the reverse of that is a criminal investigation doesn't use Garrity, and we're not forcing you to talk to us. The same criminal warnings apply in an SIU investigation, at least when we started it, as applied to me investigating somebody for a burglary. You could be read a Miranda warning, and and you could be told, if you want to speak to us voluntarily, you can. All of that information can be handed over to internal affairs. Garrity doesn't apply. It doesn't affect any of it. So, it's a directional investigation. Yeah. Essentially, IAD can't hand anything over to criminal. Criminal can hand everything over to IAD. And then IAD can use that to do their investigation, their internal investigations. So because of that, and that's where that question came in, is we're doing both investigations in the same room. So that whole Garrity, issue really comes into play of I'm sitting there hearing, the internal investigator talking about the employment and the interviews and all that. And I would have to, sometimes we would get up and walk out of the room, or the investigator doing the Garrity internal investigation snap their fingers and point to you and go, get out, and you'd get up and walk out until you got called back in. But I could sit there and do all of my investigation if I'm doing the criminal, and they could just sit there and hang out and hear everything, and it was just no big deal. It was a really, really bad intersection of investigations. So I brought it to Halstead. He said, yeah, that is terrible, and you need to start a new unit and have at it. So, and we had worked with the POA. We had worked with Cleat, and the other person, I won't mention his name, he's still in the department that helped start the unit. We worked with all of them and told them, explained to them, this is why we think this is important, because it actually will protect officers' rights for this to be separated out. And, and they all talked, they, did their discussions and came back to us and they said, yeah, we don't think that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
To do it this way.
The important part to point out is just the fact that not only internally are you guys trying to keep yourselves in check through the investigations, but you're continuously improving the process in which it goes. So it gets better and better. You realize there was a fault, not that you guys were trying to do anything malicious, but you realize like there's an integrity issue for both cases that we need to address, and you guys fixed it, and you had leadership that recognized it. So the part that I ask people that are outside police work to recognize is like, look, even we don't see some of the problems until we face them. Like, well, the light bulb's got to go off where you're like, all right, this is an issue. And then the decision's got to be made, and it's got to be brought up to the chain and has to be addressed. So just the fact that you guys are doing that all the time, like that never stops. Like, this is another example. Like no one's making me do this, but the point of the show is to help improve police work. It's to improve community relations. We're doing both of those right now, because another agency may see this and hear you talking about like, oh shit, we do that, and they don't realize it.
It's entirely possible. I mean, we were really unique, at least when I was there, when I talked to other departments, that we did it that way, and unique in a bad way.
Yeah.
we were not cutting edge.
Right.
And so when we made the correction, we made it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And it honestly was, and people didn't believe it, because we real quickly got the reputation of, oh, that's the Chief's Goon Squad. And it got worse than that at some points. That wasn't the case at all. It was just simply trying to make sure that the rights of the officers were observed to where they got a fair investigation on either side of it.
Yeah.
And when SIU got complaints early on, we would let internal affairs know. We would tell them, hey, we got a complaint. Here's what it is. And then we wouldn't talk to them again. And that's how good the separation was between us, that they would go, okay, let us know when you're 50% done. Is this going somewhere that we need to be concerned about? And every once in a while, there was some of them that, were so bad that you had to get internal affairs. You had to get their gun and badge. You had to stop, what was happening right then. That was rare that occurred. But by and large, they would just sit back and go, okay, when you're done, we could hand off our investigations, because that was the legal route to go to, or the proper route to go to, was let us do our investigation, internal affairs, and we will pass this off to you. And then whatever employment investigation needs to be made after that, you can make it, because sometimes it wasn't a criminal offense.
Yeah.
But it could have been a policy violation, and there was no reason to intermingle the two. So it worked, and that was the real reason SIU was started, and a lot of people really don't know that. And we did audit work also and some other behind-the-scenes work, but the reason that I went to Jeff Halstead and said, Chief, we need to do this, was because we are violating officers' rights, and we need to do it better. And he said, okay. And, like you said, that was some good leadership, to me on his part.
Yeah.
And he did not have an easy tenure his first couple of years, because he had a lot of bad things happen on the criminal side of things, and it looked bad, but at least we had somebody who could look at it. And there were some of them that even us, that were, say, it involved a DWI or something like that. That wasn't in our wheelhouse. And we said, those are the one things we're not going to investigate, because we can't, testify to these things. We don't want you handing off an investigation that was all these things were done, and then we file it, because we don't know what we're doing. So, those, y'all keep those.
Yeah.
And so we were real specific about how we wrote that policy and how we separated that unit out. And I thought we did a good job. I feel like we did. And again, it may have turned into something different than what it was envisioned, when we started it, but it was done for the right reasons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, sir, we're 2 hours in.
Wow. Okay.
And I want to get, I don't know how much you've got to say about tunnel to towers.
Right.
So I want to at least get that in there too.
Sure.
So give me the main reason you reached out to me.
So I'll give you the main reason. So,
save the best for last.
Yeah. So tunnel to towers, one of them sitting around, and you get one of these citywide emails that says, hey, here's a 5K run, or here's a charity event of some sort. Well, this was in 2016, one from Tunnel to Towers saying, hey, we have a 5K run in Fort Worth, Texas. And I read about it. I'm like, it's a pretty good, looks like a good organization. They support officers, military, and fire. And, so I went and ran in their 5K in 2016, and it never came back. It wasn't well attended, and it just died after that. So fast forward to 2018, and I was a lieutenant and was assigned to the criminal intelligence unit at that point. And, the intel unit was under my, supervision, and which included, Garrett Hull was, one of my troops. And so, if you know the story, Garrett and his team had chased down a group of serial robbers, and they were out robbing and hurting people in Fort Worth, and they were mostly attacking minority bars, primarily Hispanic bars, where people were unlikely to call police. I mean, it was this group of robbers had really identified a victim group that they, knew probably weren't going to cooperate with police. So the team had followed this group of robbers to a bar over on the short south side. What ensued was a gunfight that night, and Garrett Hull was killed. And that's the moment in your life as a lieutenant, as a friend, as a cop. Everything stops in the world, and it did for me. And I'd experienced this when Hank Nava died as a friend. I hadn't experienced it as a supervisor until then. And, I remember getting the phone call, and it was, hey, LT, we've been in a gunfight and got an officer down. And I said, where are you at? He said, 600 Biddison. And I said, be there in a minute. That's all the information I needed. And, even my wife, she goes, I timed you leaving the house. And she goes, from phone call to out the door and out the driveway, it was 8 minutes. And so anyway, Garrett died the next day. And, there's, at this point, you have all kinds of people, making offers to help the family, and people running interference also for the family to make sure that, scammers and people taking advantage of the family in a crisis moment don't happen. So I went down to Major Case one day to do some follow-up work and hand off some paperwork. And Anthony White, he doesn't mind me putting him in this story because I've told it several times. He caught me on the way out, and he says, hey, I want to talk to you. I've gotten some phone calls about, people, making these offers, and I want to talk to you about some of them. And I said, okay, I'll be back in a minute. So on the way out, he says, I got this phone call from blank, and I got this phone call. And he goes, man, I got one. He goes, you talk about out there. He goes, this guy sounded like, a mafia don right out of Brooklyn. He said, heavy accent. Oh, we're going to come down. We're going to pay off the family's mortgage. And, we just need all their information. Send it to us. And he goes, I said, what was the name of that one? He goes, Steven Siller or something weird like that. And I said, you need to call them back. And he kind of stopped for a second. He goes, and you know this, how? And so I told him the story about running in their run in 2016, and I told him the whole story about the foundation. And he goes, what are the chances of me grabbing any officer, anybody, and saying, hey, let me run this by you? He goes, I bet you're the only person that knows about Tunnel to Towers Foundation. I said, I don't know about that, but I said, I don't think it's a coincidence that we happen to talk to each other today. Yeah. So 6 weeks later, the Tunnel to Towers Foundation was in Fort Worth, Texas, handing Garrett's family a check to pay off the home.
Dang.
Completely paid off their mortgage. So the background of Tunnel to Towers is Steven Siller was a firefighter in New York City and was assigned to Squad 1. He was off duty the day the Twin Towers were attacked, going to play golf with his brothers. And he was on his way to go and, heard on the radio all the news reports about the attack. And he called his brothers and said, hey, y'all know what's going on. I got to go to work. So he went back to his squad, and they, of course, were already out. And so he strapped on his gear, and he ran down to the Twin Towers. And so he went through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel down to the towers, which is where the name Tunnel to Towers came from.
Okay.
He died there that day, and during the, ensuing collapse of the towers. And so when the family was told these stories and found out what had occurred and that he had, strapped on all his gear and ran almost 2.5 miles, they kind of, the wheels started spinning. We got to do something. Look, there were 343 firefighters, and I forget, it's 60 somewhat officers killed in this attack. We got to support them. So they started a 5K run, which is the Tunnel to Towers run, in honor of their brother who almost ran a full 5K in full bunker gear.
Yeah.
So so their foundation, they started by trying to support families affected by 9/11 and raising money just to give to them to try to soften the financial burdens and some of the crisis that they might be facing and losing their police officer, firefighter, family member. So a few years later, they started realizing how many military people were also now kind of this collateral, have been pulled into what happened at 9/11. Now they're fighting foreign wars in Iraq, Afghanistan because of what happened here. And we're having our soldiers are dying over there, but they're also coming back catastrophically injured. And how can we help them? So the same thing, Gold Star families, and they can't help every single one of them, but there's an application process that they go through to do this, to be helped financially. And then they also do smart homes for catastrophically injured service members. And, and these are custom smart homes. And, you've got these service members that are coming back, quadruple amputees. And, the needs that they have are so overwhelming. To be able to build a home for them that meets their needs is absolutely incredible. Also financially, a burden.
Yeah.
So they expanded out. And again, so for, Garrett's family, for 4 of the 5 families in Dallas, when the officers in 2016 were killed in the ambush there, they paid off 4 of the 5 of the homes of those officers also. So when they say we're going to take care of people in this position, they mean it. They're coming to Texas, to our hometown, and taking care of a family of one of our officers that have been killed in the line of duty. No small fee. They've expanded to, they have 5K runs all over the United States. And so in May of 2019, Sabrina Hull, Garrett's widow, started and I don't know if I'd call it a foundation or a movement or what you want to call it, but called Mission 3105, which was Garrett's ID number 3105. And for the month of May, pay forward, do something nice for somebody, pay forward something somewhere for the entire month of May was what Sabrina started. And so that month I thought about it and went, okay, now's the time for me to jump in here. I'm going to bring a 5K run to Fort Worth. So I called Tunnel to Towers and told them my story. And I went through a vetting process, 3-part interviews before they said, yeah, we think you're the right guy. I don't know that that background process could have been better. I'll say that.
Yeah.
It's overwhelming, and I don't know what I'm doing. I'm learning as I go. So we brought a 5K run to Fort Worth in 2019, and we had about 235 people participated in that run. And it's a method to raise money for the foundation, but also it's, as much as anything, it's to bring community together, to bring out information that you've got officers, you've got firefighters, you've got military service members who need our help. And this is how we, help them as it's financially. And so, it allows people to understand what the donation process is, that coming to these runs, it kind of gets that ball rolling.
Yeah.
Through sponsorships and also a lot of people, they'll join the $11 a month club. It's $11 a month through Tunnel to Towers. And, it's just right out of your checkbook or whatever. And that helps pay for these smart homes, pay for these mortgage payoffs. And so the total number in Texas has been 31 times they've been to Texas now to either build a smart home, to give a Gold Star family a mortgage-free home, or to pay for the home of a firefighter or police officer killed in the line of duty. It's 31 times they've come to our home state.
Yep.
And so what I do when I go to talk to, police officers, police academy, I'll ask them, raise your hand if you meet this criteria, that you are married, you have kids under the age of 18 at home, and you've got a mortgage. And by and large, 75% of that room will raise their hand. And all I want them to know is that, if you'd support an organization that would take care of your family for the rest of their lives, or pay that mortgage off in that crisis moment, they don't have to worry about a home to live in for the rest of their lives, potentially. Would you support that organization? Would you just come out and be in this 5K run? And the answer, I hope, is yes. Mm-hmm. When that question is posed to them. Or would you support that for your fellow officer, for the person sitting next to you? My son's a firefighter in Fort Worth, and, I would like to think that at any point in his life, if this occurred, if he met that, foundation criteria, he'd be taken care of, that his wife or his kids would be taken care of whenever he has kids. So that's why it's important for me to be involved with Tunnel to Towers. I'm actually going to New York City. This is the 20th year of the 9/11 attacks on our country. So the last week in September, I'm going to go to Fort Worth, and I'm going to run in their 5K run, which follows the footsteps of Stephen Siller through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel down to
Oh, really?
Towers. Yeah, it actually follows his actual footsteps. Through there.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to carry. We have a Tunnel to Towers, a Fort Worth flag. I'm going to carry that with me to New York City and run in that run
nice.
In September.
That's cool.
And all I ask is if this is something that you could get behind, and for me, for cops and firefighters, I don't know how you can't. If you go on the webpage and read about what they do and what they've done, and like I said, 31 times in Texas they've been to our state and said, from New York City, and everybody makes fun of, we don't want these Yankees down in Texas doing things. Well, yeah actually we do. When they say we're going to stand behind you, they mean it in a big way. And, so if that's something you can wrap your head around, and for me, I don't know how it isn't. Honestly, come out and our run. It's October 16th, and it's at the Shops at Clear Fork down on the southwest side of Fort Worth. It's not a competition. It's a run. It's a walk. It's a gathering for community to come out and understand a little bit. And what you said earlier, this is a public service that we're trying to get something out for people to understand what cops might go through or what cops do. Come out and see us, because you're going to be surrounded by a bunch of first responders who may have lost a loved one. They may have lost a friend. They may have lost their husband or their wife. And I think that connection is something that's missing for the community to get a better understanding of what we go through every day as first responders, and make a little bit better connection. And also it just builds, Fort Worth is unique, I think, in the way that the community generally supports the officers. And I'd ask Fort Worth to continue to come out, support this also, because it's going to help somebody. It's going to help a family of a firefighter, a police officer, something.
Yeah.
And that goes back to Mitch Felder's advice for me 10 years ago in Home Depot. Find something that you can really dig into as a retired officer that's important to you. And this is, important to me. We're not going to get everything right. We're going to make mistakes. And, I may be the only one that knows it as the volunteer run director. Mm-hmm. But, it's just an enjoyable day. It's 2 hours out of your morning, and, come out and support it. And I think it's an important thing, especially for officers. I got a message last night. We have a firefighter from France who said, Texas has always been on my bucket list. I'm going to come run in your run this year.
Nice.
Yeah. So he said, I've bought my plane.
What is his name?
You just caught me.
Well, I had a guy from France also reach out to me.
Yeah.
And I want to say he had something to do with helicopters and FD and all sorts of crazy stuff throughout his career.
Well, it's funny. You should ask me, because it's just one of those, I just completely draw a blank, and I don't want to, bury myself. I can't go through Facebook.
No, that's okay.
Fast, but anyway.
I'm glad you brought up
that.
And Garrett, if you take a look at that coin right there, and then obviously this is my memorial bottle for Garrett. So I'm glad you gave him a memory shout out.
Sure.
He deserves it.
Yeah.
And
and I'm not going to give you a challenge coin. I'm going to give you one of our Tunnel to Towers ribbons and our run medals.
So I don't even have to run.
No, you got to earn that later on. So, but that's to put in your collection of things. I don't know we're going to give those out this year, but it was our first year run. We thought, let's make this special, and that's one of our medals from the first year run.
So if you're listening, it's a very sparkly blue medal that says Tunnel of Towers Foundation, let us do good. And it's got their signature logo on there with it looks like a firefighter holding an American flag, and you can see the two towers in the background. It's got it says 9/11, but the towers are the ones. And then On the other side, it's got 3 stars. It says, "Follow the footsteps. Thank you for your support." So very cool. I appreciate it, sir.
So, and it's Anthony Locks is the firefighter from France that's coming over to us.
Okay, Anthony. Yeah. All right. I'll have to see if that was the same dude.
Yeah. And we also got a message yesterday that a smart home recipient who lives in Keller, Texas, he was paralyzed in Afghanistan in an IED attack, and he's also going to come out and he's going to participate in our ride as well. So the people that have been affected by this, the families, they like to stay involved, and so he's going to come out, and I think it'll be real special for people to maybe be able to hear from him and hear that story of how this directly affected them. And Sabrina Hull said, she'll be out also to run again this year. Yeah. She and their daughters came out for our first run and have been real big supporters for us also. And,
okay.
So like I said, October 16th, 2021.
Okay.
Find us on the website.
I will, I'm going to pin y'all to my Facebook page because it's really the only social media I know how to do that on right now. So I'll put you guys up there because I also have 10-7 Outdoors, which is something Paul wears into.
Right.
And that is for the children of fallen officers, and they take them out on hunts and stuff like that. And just like you said, it's not something they just do once. It's something they stick with them for the duration after. So, something I definitely, you've sold me, sir. I'd never heard of it, and just knowing that you supported it alone was enough for me. But now that you've explained it in depth, that's cool. Yeah. I'm glad you came on to talk about it.
Yeah, I appreciate the chance.
No problem. Other than that, how's retirement going?
It's good.
Yeah, you loving it?
I'm enjoying it. I fish as much as I can, work when I can, and volunteer as much as I can. And then had the greatest thing in the world, at least right now, happen. My first grandkid was born this past week. So retirement allowed me to,
nice.
Travel around.
So you got somebody to spoil.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that as well.
Any advice out there for those that are about to turn their paperwork in and go on the retirement road?
Sure. It's the advice I got from another retired sergeant, Doug Lusty. Best advice towards the end. He walked up and he goes, "Winky, remember this." He goes, "Finish well." And I smiled and I said, "I got you." He goes, "Finish well." And I had a chief ask me, or somebody in upper management asked me as I was getting ready to leave, he goes, "I know there was a little bit of a rub sometimes between us, and you're not leaving it." And I say, I got my full 30 years in. According to the drop, I left at 29 and a half years. And I said, he goes, "Can I get you to stay?" And I said, "No, I'm happy." And I said, "And that's why I'm leaving." And he kind of looked at me like, "What? Do what?" And I said, "I don't want to wait until I'm that guy that people duck. I don't want to get into a moment where I'm not." I said, "I am completely happy and satisfied. Now's the right time." And I said, "And there's nothing that can make me go back." And I think it allows me, and I'm not looking through rose-colored glasses. I'm looking through the fact that I left happy. I left at the right time, and I can look back on all the good parts. There was bad in my career, and there's bad in every officer's career, but I think it makes you appreciate all of it a little bit better. And, and I just, I just didn't want to be that guy. Okay. So leave happy and finish strong.
That's smart. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah.
I'll use that, and then I still got another 15 plus. So I got a minute.
Yeah, you're in the marathon phase.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yep. But all right, brother. I'm glad to have you.
Thank you again. I appreciate it.
It's been a good show, man.